I was gaslit into recognizing a demand that I address the slovenly way that the NAACP uses O.J. Simpson to justify the AIDS attack. Dennis Schatzman, who was unfortunately a victim of a gunfire, and the judge in Allegheny County, recruited me into a conversation about the prospect that O.J. Simpson had been victim of a nerve agent. And although he was masking the disreputable purpose, which was to justify the AIDS attack, Allegheny County was counting on the situation being sufficiently garbled that his insistence that the glove didn't fit proved O.J. innocent. Had ramifications for me. Now, O.J. Simpson was in the movie The Towering Inferno that I went to the day after there was Sensorama next door. Earthquake was playing. He wears a 44 shirt. The night as I was detoxing, trying to recover from being poisoned by Wattenmaker and Serby, I sat there in that trembling movie theater watching The Towering Inferno. And David Berkowitz conspicuously guzzled a lot of orange juice in front of me. David Berkowitz, who lived on Denniston Street. And of course, it's a foil against and an explanation for taking Mackenzie Shirilla hostage. Because I reached out to Mackenzie Shirilla, recognizing that she was a victim of a seizure. The NAACP hopes to implicate me in their justification for Mount Desert Island. In other words, they don't care about O.J. Simpson being toxed by the people who should be investigating about Ted Bundy and other people who went berserk from neurohypnotic agents created by Bernard Wattenmaker and his gang. And I admit that I stuck my neck out for Mackenzie Shirilla. I take that back. I don't like that phrase because John Lennon's criminals used that phrase in correspondence with me and are conspicuously producing images of Gaussian journalists paralyzed from the neck down. And they have murdered people. You know, this is a vigilante Gestapo coming from media defending Yoko Ono. She's a sadist, very strange and sadistic neocon. What I mean to say is that my heart went out to Mackenzie Shirilla because I recognized the neurohypnotic element that was used by Dr. Mackenzie and Dr. Wattenmaker in their attempt to create an enemy within scenario where I became possessed and carpe diem'd upon Leslie Katz. And when I failed, they became very, very angry. In other words, I overcame with the help of Islamic Sufism and music and self-examination. The pain that this neuroplasm was causing, I went into seizures. It was dormant during sex, but it came out in spells of suffering because of the biochemistry of the poison. which they knew it was deliberate. They understood the recipe they were using. You can see that this was the negligence of the NAACP. The NAACP manifestly is not doing this to protect anybody. Certainly, they're using O.J. Simpson as a black symbol, but they're trying to get over on a white symbol that they sacrificed because they used this nerve agent on me, and I overcame the compulsion to there was no compulsion to do violence. That's not what it was. It was a neurotraumatic seizure to scream and yell. You know, the demonic within this, that it premeditated impactive interpretive disorder, and that was what I was describing. It was in the text. The NAACP, the Pittsburgh, lived by any code of ethics. They would have said, if, let me say this again, if Pitt, NAACP, lived by any code of ethics, you know, they're trying to say if my code of ethics was not racial, I would defend O.J. Simpson. That's putting the cart before the horse. Because the issue had been swept under the carpet when that happened with Simpson. If the NAACP of Pittsburgh lived by any code of ethics, they would have said these letters clearly show that Wecht and Wattenmaker knew the recipe of the nerve agent that Jill and Kyra contaminated and poisoned, terrified, traumatized, and they would have to admit that I was terrified, traumatized. I was bagging my fingernails bloody, hiding in the towel closet, and they made asses of themselves calling me a sissy. They would have to admit that the letters show the recipe was understood by the people who did it. In other words, they knew that the recipe was premeditated to cause this vituperative disorder I was describing. And I overcame that, which drove them insane with that hatred for me, because it meant that I was protecting our society by working on myself. And they told this tall tale, oh, Jimmy was dangerous to Leslie. That's why we made a pornographic peep show of him and sold the money on the black market to advocate and build momentum for the IDF in Gaza. It's idiotic spin from torrid concoctory that you just have to learn to expect from the city of Pittsburgh. I don't know how else to put it. You know, the details are on the table. You know, they attribute things to me. They just scribble between the lines, things I have absolutely no interest or involvement in at all. And they point fingers at me and say, you did it, you with your Mr. Potato Head